What if one of medieval Europe's most famous battles had ended in disaster for England instead of triumph? The year was 1415, and Henry V of England stood with a tired, sick, and outnumbered army against the might of France. Yet against all odds, history records that Henry's longbowmen cut down thousands of French knights, securing one of the most legendary victories in English history. But imagine if that day on the muddy fields of Agincourt had gone the other way. What if France had crushed Henry's army and ended the 100 Years' War in a single stroke? Let's dive in. The real battle. On October 25th, 1415, the feast day of St. Crispin, the English army found itself surrounded and outnumbered by a French force 3 times its size. But it wasn't just numbers that weighed them down. The English ranks were ravaged by dysentery. Soldiers had been marching for weeks with little rest, their bodies weakened by sickness and exhaustion. Contemporary accounts describe men so overcome with diarrhea that they cut flap-like openings into the backs of their tunics, relieving themselves as they marched. The battlefield itself must have been wet, foul-smelling, and hazardous. Imagine the mud of northern France, already churned by rain and hooves, now laced with human waste. Every moment risked slipping, stumbling, or worse. These weren't the shining knights of chivalric romance, they were sick, half-starved men, their bowels leaking all over the battlefield as they tried to fight for their lives. And yet, in our timeline, Henry V's tactics still carried the day. His clever positioning, placing his army behind sharpened stakes, and his reliance on the longbow's deadly range forced the French cavalry and knights into narrow killing zones. Again and again, French charges collapsed into chaos, bogged down in the mud to be cut down by English arrows. Against all odds, and despite the stink and misery, the English carried one of their most legendary victories. But it was never inevitable. The alternate turn. Now imagine this. The French commanders do not blunder into chaos. Instead of charging headlong into the narrow killing fields, they coordinate with precision. Trumpets blare, and French cavalry fan out across the flanks, forcing the English longbowmen to split their fire. The thick, muddy ground still slows the knights down, but their sheer numbers, when well coordinated, compensate for this. Thousands press forward, shields raised against the storm of arrows, while fresh infantry advance behind them in disciplined ranks. The English archers fight desperately, loosing arrows until their fingers bleed, but for every knight that falls, another takes his place. The stakes Henry ordered into the ground to break cavalry charges are ripped up or bypassed. On the right flank, French horsemen crash into the line, breaking through and cutting down archers at close quarters. The heart of the English force, weary men-at-arms packed shoulder to shoulder, suddenly finds itself pressed from 3 sides. Mud, exhaustion, and disease all weigh on them like chains. The thin line buckles under relentless pressure. A cry goes up that the flank is collapsing. In the melee, the English king himself is targeted. Henry V, fighting in the thick of the fray with his small household guard, becomes the rallying point for desperate defenders. His surcoat, emblazoned with the lions of England, makes him impossible to miss. French knights push toward him, determined to bring down the invader. Some sources in our own timeline record that Henry narrowly escaped death when an axe blow dented his helmet. In this alternate scenario, his luck finally runs out. Whether struck down in combat, dragged from his horse and captured, or killed outright, the result is the same. The English banners tumble into the mud, trampled under French boots and hooves. The St. Crispin's Day miracle that never was becomes instead a catastrophe. Not a story of impossible triumph, but of an outnumbered army crushed, its king lost, and its ambition drowned in the mud of northern France. The immediate aftermath. The consequences are immediate and devastating for England. The flower of English nobility, many of whom accompanied Henry, lie dead on the field or kneel in chains. The army is annihilated, leaving no foothold in the north. Instead of a triumphant march to Calais, survivors scatter in disarray, hunted down by mounted patrols. For the captured, their fates vary according to rank and ransom value. Wealthy lords and knights are dragged off to French strongholds, destined to languish in cold cells, while their families back in England scramble to raise ruinous sums for their release. But for common soldiers, there is no ransom. They are lined up and executed in grim, public displays meant to terrify future invaders. Some are merely hanged as traitors. Others are beheaded or disemboweled, their corpses left to rot in the mud as a warning to any who might follow in Henry's footsteps. Contemporary punishments could be especially gruesome. The use of the wheel, quartering, or simply burning captives alive were common practices. To a sick, dysentery-ravaged man, this was the final humiliation, a filthy, disease-ridden death in enemy hands. France proclaims a stunning victory, and Charles VI's court declares Henry's invasion a failure. The Valois monarchy, long shaken by defeats, suddenly finds itself reinvigorated. Chroniclers record the day not as an English miracle, but as proof that divine justice had struck down an arrogant invader. Priests in Paris preached sermons celebrating God's judgment of the unclean English, who had dared to profane French soil, only to be destroyed in the mud. A Europe transformed. The ripple effects spread across Europe. France secures its legitimacy and prestige, rallying its nobility under the crown instead of squabbling in civil war. With the English king dead, the French factions realign behind Charles VI. England reels from the disaster. Henry's death or capture throws the realm into chaos. The fragile Lancastrian dynasty, still insecure after usurping the throne in 1399, now faces rebellion at home. Without Agincourt to cement his glory, Henry is remembered not as a warrior king, but as a reckless monarch who led his people into ruin. Burgundy and other continental powers see an opportunity. Rather than shifting alliances around a powerful England, they rally to a confident France, weakening English influence abroad. The 100 Years' War, rather than dragging on until 1453, might end in 1415, with France dominant and England excluded from the continent. The long-term consequences. With no victory at Agincourt, England never gains the prestige that allowed Henry's son to briefly claim the French throne through the Treaty of Troy. Joan of Arc's story may never have happened, for there would be no need for France to rally against a conquering English king. Instead, France consolidates early, strengthening its monarchy centuries before it did in our timeline. England, meanwhile, is destabilized. Defeat weakens the Lancastrian dynasty, potentially hastening the Wars of the Roses by decades. Without Henry V's heroic legacy, the House of Lancaster lacks legitimacy, and rivals like the Yorkists seize their chance sooner. In the long run, an early French victory reshapes European power balances. A unified France emerges as the strongest state in Western Europe, while England turns inward, its dreams of continental empire shattered in the mud of Agincourt. Conclusion. The Battle of Agincourt is remembered as one of England's greatest triumphs, immortalized in Shakespeare's stirring speeches. But its outcome was never guaranteed. A single shift in tactics, a better coordinated French command, or the fall of Henry V could have transformed the 100 Years' War and the fate of Europe. Instead of a legendary English victory, Agincourt could have been remembered as the graveyard of English ambition in France, and the dawn of an earlier, stronger French monarchy. If you want more explorations of the obscure paths not taken, subscribe to Alt History Zone. After all, you don't want to miss the next wrong turn or the next catastrophe avoided. Stay tuned!